Robert De Niro is Trump derangement syndrome patient zero. Pete Buttigieg blames airplane turbulence on climate change. Hillary Clinton blames everyone, but especially women, for her 2016 loss. Jill Biden claims it's Trump who can't complete a sentence, and illegals are running up the cost of hotel rooms in New York City. It's time for my losers of the week. Plus, we are still on verdict watch in the sham scam Trump hush money trial. Matt Palumbo, author of The Man Behind the Curtain, joins me later to weigh in. The show starts now. So the Democrat agenda is falling faster than their candidate Joe Biden, but in an attempt to resuscitate it, to connect with voters who are struggling, to lessen fears over Biden's age, the Biden-Harris team has brought in 80-year-old multimillionaire Robert De Niro to soothe concerns. Not only is he the voice of the Biden-Harris anti-Trump ad, he also ventured to the scene of the Trump trial and delivered the performance of a lifetime.
Under Trump, this kind of government will perish from the earth. I don't mean to scare you. No, wait, maybe I do mean to scare you. If Trump returns to the White House, you can kiss these freedoms goodbye that we all take for granted. And elections, forget about it. That's over. That's done. If he gets in, I can tell you right now, he will never leave. He will never leave. You know that. He will never leave. What does that mean? Is that the country we want to live in? Do we want him running this country and saying, I'm not leaving, I'm dictator for life? And that's why I've joined the Biden-Harris campaign, because the only way to preserve our freedoms and hold on to our humanity is to vote for Joe Biden for president. Really. We don't have a choice.
Well, that was better than his work in Killers of the Flower Moon for sure. But beyond the obvious Trump derangement syndrome he displayed there, the tone deafness of it all is really textbook Biden campaign. Take the Trump ending democracy part out of it, though that's bad enough, and think about how elitist and stupid it is to use a multimillionaire actor as your campaign surrogate. Is De Niro really feeling your pain? Of course not. But the Democrat Party does not know or care what voters care about. They think this democracy at stake thing is going to do the trick because, quite frankly, as long as they pack illegals in here as future voters, it doesn't really matter what Americans think of the horrible job they're doing. But I would bet the farm that no average working-class New Yorkers are truly cool with using their tax dollars going to this sham trial against Donald Trump, regardless of how they feel about Donald Trump, by the way. The only ones that are fine with it are rich liberal elites like Robert De Niro. And Loser 2 this week just further emphasizes my point. The only voters who really give a crap about so-called climate change are those same privileged, whiny liberals, because average people don't have the time or money for that crap. But nevertheless, the left pushes it, like Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg blaming airline turbulence on climate change.
The reality is the effects of climate change are already upon us in terms of our transportation. We've seen that in the form of everything from heat waves that shouldn't statistically even be possible, threatening to melt the cables of transit systems in the Pacific Northwest, to hurricane seasons becoming more and more extreme, and indications that turbulence is up by about 15%.
Ask yourself this. Is there anything Democrats won't blame on climate change? Nope, I sure don't think so. But Pete Buttigieg there cited that turbulence is up 15% and that the effects of climate change are already upon us in terms of transportation. This also coming from the same man who claims failing infrastructure is due to systemic racism. You know, I don't know what DEI bin the Biden administration pulls from to find its cabinet members and officials, but for the sake of our entire country, just please stop. But speaking of bins of things, my next loser this week is Miss Basket of Deplorables herself, Hillary Clinton. For some odd reason, the media keeps interviewing her. She probably demands it. But in a headline in its 8th year now, Hillary Clinton blames everyone but herself for losing to Trump in 2016. In fact, if you Google Hillary blames, which I did, the search results are literally endless. But in this most recent case, Hillary told the New York Times she blames, drum roll please, women. She said that after then FBI Director James Comey reopened the investigation into her private email server, women voters weren't willing to take a risk on her because she is a woman and she's expected to be perfect. She went on to say voters were willing to take a risk on imperfect Trump because he's a man. If given the chance, I'd ask old Hillary, what is a woman? But this song and dance of her bitter blame game is just so old and tired, kind of like Hillary Clinton herself. Hillary, you lost because we don't trust you. We don't like you. We wanted Trump, and guess what? We still do. Get over it and yourself already. But speaking of women you can't trust, next up is First Lady Jill Biden. When she's not calling Hispanic people breakfast tacos or on duty literally holding her husband on his feet, she is lying through her teeth. Take a listen to this little doozy.
You need to see Trump and you need to see the president and you need to see the differences. And my husband's, and you're going to see how smart he is and the experience he has. And then you'll see somebody who, like you're saying, I'm going to use Joy's words, can't put a sentence together. Right. And everything is beautiful and it's wonderful.
Tremendous.
Bigly. Yeah,
tremendous.
Yeah.
It's hard to make the hags of The View look worse, but Jill Biden has done it. She's not only a liar, but she's an elder abuser, and she makes me sick. And so does this. My final losers this week are the illegal immigrants and their Democrat enablers who are running up the cost of hotel rooms in New York City. Everything costs more in Joe Biden's Democrat utopia, and that includes hotel rooms. Inflation is, of course, part of that, but in New York City, another big part of that can also be attributed to the thousands of freeloading illegal immigrants who are squatting in taxpayer-funded and often luxury hotel accommodations. Rooms are now averaging over $300 a night, and if you've been to New York City, you know that isn't going to get you much to start with. But part of what's driving the supply and demand issue is the dozens of hotels that have been converted into migrant shelters. And when I say migrant, of course I mean illegal immigrant. This is costing New York taxpayers an arm and a leg, but I don't actually feel that bad for y'all because you keep voting for this. I do feel badly for the tourists who are coming to the Big Apple and can't afford a decent hotel room due to the jacked up rates. Even worse, I can't imagine staying in a hotel that doubles as an illegal immigrant shelter. So I guess the moral of this story is similar to the moral of the year. Don't live in blue states and probably don't vacation in them either. Those are my losers of the week, but turning now to what we're all talking about, the awaited verdict in the Trump hush money sham scam trial. Obviously still awaiting a verdict there after a long day yesterday and a long morning of the jury having to re-listen to jury instructions, re-listen to transcript of testimony. We're still awaiting the verdict there, although my hopes are not high given the state of New York, the state of this case itself, and the state of the jury. But I want to bring in Matt Palumbo, author of The Man Behind the Curtain, to weigh in on all of it and so much more. Matt, I know you've been watching this like I have. What are your top line thoughts on everything we've been seeing the last couple of days especially?
Well, from our perspective, it seems like the prosecution got completely destroyed. I mean, Michael Cohen's credibility was annihilated on the stand. Stormy Daniels got caught in a few lies, and Bill Maher even pointed out on his show, showing where the lies were. But we also have to remember this is New York City, and a lot of these people, I mean, it's statistically more likely than not that if you grab a person off the street there, they vehemently hate Donald Trump, unfortunately. I mean, this is a city where he got, I think, under 10% of the vote. I mean, don't quote me on that. It's at least under 20. So, the point being, you're not going to get a very friendly audience there, but it's also the case we only need one juror to go the other way. And the jurors were asked, I saw this on Twitter or X earlier, what news sources do they consume? And there was one juror where the only news source he consumed was Truth Social. So that guy's a pretty strong candidate for being someone who votes against Trump being guilty. And to be honest, if you're on Truth Social, it's probably only because you're a Trump supporter. So I think there's one guy there. There was another juror who said he gets his news from the New York Times, but there was also the Wall Street Journal, and I believe it was CNBC, which are fiscally more right-leaning. So you could hope that he's more right-leaning overall. So I would say the mistrial is really the best case scenario. They're not going to acquit him just because it's a bunch of liberal nut jobs on the jury, presumably. But there's some hope there. The real thing, or And I think we're all hopeful that it will at least the sham of the trial, or it'll at least be exposed enough as a sham where it'll tilt the vote in favor of Donald Trump. And that, when you're running for president, as Joe Biden is, and your campaign strategy is putting your opponent in jail, obviously there are pretty poor optics there, especially when it's for something that's pretty much invented. I mean, the whole hush money thing, we've known about this for what, 5 or 6 years? I mean, if there was a crime here during the Trump administration when everyone was trying to take this guy down with Russia or whatever else, you'd think someone would have noticed this at some point and said, hey, this is something we should prosecute. And instead, they had to remove back the statute of limitations and all these other very shady things. Paul Morrow pointed out to me on Fox that the one thing every Trump trial has in common is that they are unprecedented. And I would add to his point, the other one thing they have in common is that every single judge or prosecutor in these cases, without exception, has either campaigned for their position, like Letitia James did, on taking Donald Trump down, very publicly denounced Trump. The Judge Engeron, his wife, was posting anti-Trump stuff on social media. Or in the case of Judge Merchan, has donated to Joe Biden, and his daughter has worked the Democratic Party. So let's be honest, if these were legit trials, what are the odds every single one is brought by a Democrat who wants to hate Trump? All the judges hate Trump. It's a perfect storm for a witch hunt.
It sure is. And I think contrasting that, the liberals that are all up in arms over Justice Alito and the flags flying that his wife put up, and they're recuse yourself, and yet they've got all these judges. I mean, if you were to go through every double standard, every point of hypocrisy, we don't even have enough time in the day. I feel like people can see through it. But to your point about this jury, right now, what we're seeing, them having to go back and ask for more clarification and all this, I think this also just goes back to the fact that a lot of them are confused. Because if you've been watching this trial, even the attorneys that I watch every single day on Fox News are confused, in part because this is, as you mentioned, a novel legal theory. It is unprecedented. Them having to go through, I think the most disturbing part is that they don't have to have a unanimous decision on what the second crime is, and they can go 4-4-4. I mean, the fact that that's even on the table, to me, just says that this is all just being done to be able to label Donald Trump a convicted felon. And in that case, I think the best case scenario, he's acquitted. But I think worst case scenario, he just says, listen, I guess I'm a convicted felon. You put out another T-shirt with a mugshot on it. You slap the words never surrender underneath of it, and you just go with it. I think that that is his best bet. If in fact he's not fully acquitted, I think you just lean into being a convicted felon at this point if you're Donald Trump. Do you think that that's the strategy he should take if this doesn't all pan out with a full acquittal?
Well, that's really the only choice, and it's not even spin to say I've been targeted. That's why they're going after me to stop you from voting for me. I think it's a compelling narrative. I mean, obviously, I hope the guy does not go to prison, and I don't think he would, even if convicted. But you have to admit, it would be pretty cool if he crushed Joe Biden in a landslide from prison. It would just be like the ultimate middle finger to these people, leading to him then pardoning himself. But another thing that came to mind as you were talking about the jury and the judge was, there was something like 54 pages of instruction he gave the jury, and he read it verbally, but they're not providing the jury with the written instructions. Like, it's almost as if like they want them to forget, or they want it to be as sloppy as humanly possible. And again, given the evidence we saw during the trial, that really is the only strategy: is A, mislead the jury, B, make up new legal rules, as they did with the jury not supposed to be unanimous. Well, those are the main two reasons, really.
Yeah, and again, another thing that's really bothering me here is the fact that this jury not sequestered through the month long that this has been. And even last night, actually, my husband asked me, because he's been trying to catch up on all of this, and it's hard to catch up on it unless you watch it all day long. He said, the jury, are they going to be able to go home tonight? And I thought, there's no way. I mean, I knew that they've been able to go home 7 days of Memorial Day weekend. They got to go home, obviously be on their phones, talk to people. But I thought, no way, now that they're in deliberations, would they be allowed to go home? But no, sure as hell, able to go home. That's bizarre to me. Also, that the fact that they're in New York, the fact that they know they're going to be instant celebrities when this is all over, I worry that they're going to think about this and not think about the law. I worry that they're going to think, hey, I either want to be a celebrity because I got Trump, or B, I think this is really wrong, but I know that my career and my life is over in New York City if I don't vote to convict Donald Trump. What do you think, and how do you think that's going to play into all this?
Well, I think the second option is sort of the more likely one and the scarier one, that you could easily be intimidated into this. And like you are right, if you are the one reason Trump doesn't go to jail in a city where well, I think it was only 10% or so voted for him or less. Yeah, you are going to be a social pariah. People are going to be calling your employer left and right. I mean, the left are psychopaths in this regard. We know what happens to people who speak out against the trans agenda or whatever the sort of litmus test of the day is for whether or not you're a human being. But yeah, that person is a target on their back. And I'm just hoping the one guy, I mean, I'm banking on the one guy who loves Truth Social to do the right thing. And, you know, listen, let's just hope he's going to hold out.
I hope so. You know, he's going to be maligned if he is, in fact, the holdout. We really don't know. That's the thing. We can't get into their minds. We don't know how seriously they're taking justice and the rule of law, or if they've got some Trump derangement syndrome and cancel culture mixed in there. That's the unfortunate part of all this. But I want to go now to kind of your area of expertise and analysis here. And I know that maybe as we string this along, there is a connection for me, because you've got these activist DAs, these activist prosecutors, and a lot of this goes back to something that you're obviously very familiar with, and that's where the money's coming from to get these people in office in the first place that have an agenda. And a lot of that, even if loosely, comes from somebody you have studied well, and that's the Soros family. Now, I call it the family now because we know that the son is also heavily involved, as is the father. But just in speaking to that and everything that's going on in our country, we're looking at this activism being disguised as justice. What can you tell us about the Soros connection here, or the potential for a Soros connection to a lot of this different elements here?
Oh, well, there's an extremely direct link with the New York case, because it was Alvin Bragg who brought it, and he received hundreds of thousands of dollars from a super PAC that George Soros funded. And to sort of distance himself from all of this, George Soros sort of gave this defense that he didn't fund Alvin Bragg. And the logic was that, like, basically amounted to, I didn't fund Alvin Bragg. I just happened to fund a super PAC that existed for the explicit purpose of funding Alvin Bragg. That's what he does, by the way. Like with Chesa Boudin, when he got recalled, I guess he was humiliated by that. So he tried to make that argument as well of like, no, I never actually funded the guy. But that's the case with Bragg. And it's, you know, it's just in this theme of Soros prosecutors where, you know, only criminals are like are victims in their eyes, and law-abiding people are criminals, and we're seeing this show up really in other ways in the Trump trial. I mean, with Bragg, with Daniel, I believe it was Perry. I convinced him with Daniel Penny. You know, he had the famous self-defense case where he put a guy in a headlock. You know, he's facing charges and could go to jail for quite a while. But within the past month, there was a case too where there was a fight broke out on the subway. One guy pulled a gun, the other guy disarmed him and then shot him and killed him. And there was no charges filed. And they were, I don't know if race plays an element. I believe the guy was Hispanic. Obviously, Perry is white. I only mention that because the left always mentions it. But there is a double standard in justice. Everything is completely arbitrary. And as I mentioned earlier with Bragg, they had to extend the statute of limitations and for what they charged Trump with. Well, the only reason to do that is you're sort of inventing the law as you go along, as we saw with Merchant and the new rule on whether or not juries have to be unanimous.
I don't think it ends with Donald Trump either. I think people think, oh, they're just going after Trump, but this is going to extend far beyond Donald Trump. If this is allowed to happen in our country, there is no telling which conservative is going to be next, which Republican is going to be next, because they're not going to stop. Donald Trump, even if he is reelected, he's going to be a lame duck president on day one. You think they're going to stop with him? You think that he's the only person they want to target? No, he's just the biggest right now. But whoever is after him, whoever ends up being a star of the Republican Party after Donald Trump, the sights are going to be set on them. And who knows what they're going to come up with between now and then to go after other Republicans. And, you know, George Soros and his money have a lot to do with that. So I'm wondering, you know, from your perspective, now that the son is really seemingly in charge of a lot of this, what can we expect 3, 4, 5 years down the road from that family?
Well, actually, to your first point, I think the lawfare is just intimidation, because if you're an outsider, you know exactly what's going to happen after you become president, and you're going to be bogged in this, you know, legal, I guess, quagmire for an indefinite period of time. When it comes to his son, I would say unfortunately, the best case scenario is everything goes as it has been. You just continue the baseline of what the Open Society Foundation does. But I think he is more radical than his father. The only thing that really is different between them is I think Alex has seen how his father has been portrayed, and, justly so, and does not want that to happen to him. And when he took over the Open Society Foundation, he tried to sort of moderate himself to the Wall Street Journal. He said, like, I think the left has gone too far on attacking free speech and all that. And then, since then, he's donated a total of $0 to fighting the left, being against free speech. So I think it was all just lip service. But the one other thing, too, with Alex is it'll actually be way easier to track his influence because unlike his father, who wants to portray every allegation of influence he has as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, Alex practically taunts us. You can just go to his Instagram page, and it's a who's who of world leaders, celebrities, etc. Apparently, he's dating Huba Abedin, who really knows how to pick him, apparently. But it's going to be at least. He's not going to be as behind the curtain as his father, and I guess it'll make the next book a bit easier to write.
Right. Well, let's talk about that. To me, another thing here that the left has often used that talking point when anybody criticizes George Soros is that they're anti-Semitic. But then, strange thing here, I know that there's a lot of logical inconsistencies on the left, the Queers for Palestine being the first one that comes to mind. But before we were talking about the Trump trial, it seemed like the news was just completely fixated on these college campuses, and I call them the little terrorists on the college campuses, disrupting commencement, Columbia, of course, the insurrection that they staged there. And, there's been a lot of discussion about who funded the tents, the coordinated effort to get all this together. Is it actually just a bunch of unwashed green hairs doing this, or is there something behind it? And I'm sure you can tell me what connections you've seen there to the coordinated effort on these college campuses, and if you think that even though school's out for the summer, if we're going to see more of this coordination heading into convention season.
Yeah, well, the narrative from the mainstream media has been that Soros is not funding these protests, and the reason they say that is because Soros is funding these protests. There are so many groups that I actually wrote down a list in front of me so I don't miss any, which is I've never done that before. But the two biggest one, actually, I should preface this that part of Soros' strategy is to sort of present the case for Palestine as something that even Jewish people want. So there are groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, or If Not Now, that are run by Jewish people who are anti-Zionist. And I think he's trying to hedge against the obvious narrative that they're anti-Semitic, which a large majority are. And, it's funny because he's obviously the one who always spouts those allegations, so I guess he knows he has to fight them. But they are sort of the so-called Jewish wing of these groups. And there are other groups as well. They are, let me see. Okay, let me just read through the list. We've got Students for Justice in Palestine, the ones I mentioned, Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now. We've got the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. We got Within Our Lifetime. We got Palestine Legal. Am I missing any? We have the Community Justice Exchange. I mean, there are so many of these groups. They're all receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars. One of the ways that Soros sort of hides how the money is going there is he donates to a group called the Tides Foundation. Tides is actually very similar to the Open Society Foundation in that it's sort of an umbrella that just donates money to various groups. And when he donates to Tides, it gives him plausible deniability, and that it's like sort of influence laundering that, if you give 100 grand to a group, then they give 100 grand to another group. If this group has hundreds of millions of dollars in their bank account, you could technically be like, well, we don't know if it's the same 100 grand, but they are also in conjunction with the Open Society Foundation funding these groups. Another group that aids a lot is called Palestine Legal, that works with the National Lawyers Guild. The National Lawyers Guild was targeted during Red Scare, and justifiably so, as a communist front group. They were founded largely to defend communists and other far leftists. And during the 2020 George Floyd riots, they were really all over the place helping these people get out of charges. But that's one group that really shows up for these people. They also fund, and this is also common with leftist groups, bail funds to get these people out of jail when they're arrested. And one thing that people aren't really aware of is that, okay, hypothetically, suppose I committed a crime and then you posted my bail for, let's say, $1,000. If I don't break, the terms and conditions of my release, and when I go back to trial, the courtroom, whatever you want to call it, I get the $1,000, and it's on me to give it back to you. But legally, I can keep it if I wanted to. So when these bail groups are bailing these people out of jail, suppose the bail is, I don't know, $10,000. The rioter gets to keep the 10K. So you are almost incentivized to do a worse crime so the bail is higher so that you can pocket the money. Now, obviously you'd say, well, the risk of going to jail then goes up, but no, they don't face any consequences. No one faced any consequences for the George Floyd riot. So we are literally paying these people to get arrested. And there was another group, I have the name, let me just 1 second. Which one was it? Sorry, this is very embarrassing. I think it was another group funded by the Tides Foundation, but they were paying, it was around like $1,000 a month to a lot of these student activists, or I'm sorry, the outside agitators. And obviously $1,000 a month isn't enough for 8 hours. It isn't a lot for 8 hours a day of work, but you have to consider the fact these people are completely unemployable. No one's hiring these green-haired people with like face tattoos. So it's good money for them, I guess. And we saw too from the arrest records, the majority of these people aren't students. I mean, the students are pretty crazy themselves, but it really is paid people, and they are Soros-funded groups. They paid for the tents, for instance, because, and you know, there are obvious questions when you see it, like, well, how come they all have the same tent or similar tents? How are students affording this? Why do all the signs almost look like they have the same graphic designer? And that is because they all have the same source there. And then actually to sort of go, well, I think it's on topic. There's the question of why does Soros support this, given that he's ethnically Jewish? And I think my main theory would be, and I think I'm right, that leftists just generally have a disdain for nationalism. And nationalism more often is rooted in either an ethnic or a religious identity. You know, in America, it's more values-based. But those quantities make it very hard for left-wing authoritarianism or authoritarianism of any kind to thrive when you can take refuge in faith or your community, etc. So I think for that reason alone, he is very much against the concept of Israel. And it's more radical than that. There was an op-ed Soros wrote in 2007, and this was about three months before Hamas fully seized control of Gaza, where he was arguing that since they were a democratically elected government, the U.S. and Israel had an obligation to work with Hamas, which, you know, we saw how that one aged, although I'm sure he disagrees. But that actually reminds me, sorry if I'm going on a tangent here, but when it comes to that anti-Semitism narrative about George Soros, I found an op-ed that was criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu for criticizing George Soros, and they accused Netanyahu of pushing anti-Semitic tropes. So you can be the prime minister of Israel and apparently still be an anti-Semite in this bizarro world.
I would say that part of the reason that George Soros does all of this, if I were to look at this, you know, about his motivation, I would say he just hates America. So anything that's going to cause disruption and chaos in America is something he's going to fund and support. I don't think he cares about Palestine or the Palestinians or the free Palestine, Gaza. Anything that he funds, I don't think he cares about BLM or George Floyd. I think it's whatever is going to cause the most mayhem and destruction. That's what he's going to fund. And he's really got his fingers in everything. His son, fingers in everything, and this is not going to go away anytime soon. And it's wreaking havoc. The last thing I do want to ask you about before I let you go is, you know, there's been a lot of people talking about who is funding a lot of this illegal immigrant invasion. These people that are flying in to Mexico and then crossing our border. And there have been people that have alleged that George Soros might be involved in that somewhat as well. What can you tell us about that link?
I have in the book, and I don't remember the names because they're all like in Spanish, but there are a lot of NGOs in Latin America, and their main goal, I mean, the NGOs in theory are supposed to like provide services like governments in developing countries aren't, but they've become political machines. I mean, they're generally used to infiltrate countries for influence. But there are a bunch of NGOs in Latin America that Soros has funded, and they fund things like these migrant caravans, trying to get people to America. And it's getting to the point where, and I don't know if you saw the video, I'm sure you have, Fox was talking to two illegal aliens from Turkey who had just crossed the border, and they were complaining about how easy it was. And they were like, yeah, like it's so easy to get in. I mean, guys, we got to warn you, bad people can get in here. And it's like someone said it was like an assimilation speed run. It took them 20 seconds to turn against illegal immigration. That's how bad it is.
That was a shocking video. It's so great that Bill Melugin of Fox News got that video, because they were, you know, to your point, they were warning Americans as illegal immigrants themselves, warning Americans about the safety and security threats that are being posed by people like them who are coming across the border unvetted, largely undocumented and untraced. So we have so much to look forward to. Matt, I want to thank you as always for your in-depth analysis on all of this and for following it so closely. It really is such important work that you're doing and keeping tabs on all of this and where the money is going, because that is really the root of a lot of the problems we're facing in America. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you. God bless you. And we'll talk to you soon, hopefully before the election.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Thank you so much for having me back on.
Of course. Thanks, Matt. All right, folks, that does it for this Thursday edition of Tomi Lahren is Fearless. Please be sure to tune in tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern for my special and uncut interview with the one and only George Santos. Also, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. What's up, guys? Thank you for watching Tomi Lahren is Fearless. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you'll never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday and I hope you'll join me.